Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. This is your number one resource for deer hunting. If you're looking to get better at deer hunting, this is your show. I got the Ginger Bow Hunter here. Jacob, how you doing?
Doing well, Andrew. Doing extremely well.
It's that time of year, dude. So we're recording this. It's August 14th. And this is the time of year where you can really get out and start looking for feed trees. And you can start looking for stuff like persimmons, acorns, whatever else. Actually, honey locust. I found some honey locust the other day on a place we scouted, which we're going to talk about in a little while. You can actually go up and start looking for the actual mast up in the tree to key in on later. And one tip for being able to do that more effectively is when you bring your binos out. You got to have binos to do it. We both use Vortex binoculars. When you go out there and you're trying to glass up in the tree and actually see the things, you want to look for a limb that's actually hanging out with just nothing but sky behind it. So don't just like look up into the middle of the tree, but find a limb that's skylit so you got light behind it. And then it's a lot easier to see, no matter what you're looking at. If it's a honey locust, persimmon, white oak, whatever, it's going to make it a lot easier to see. So, anyways, that's our little tip of the week, Jacob. You got anything to add to that?
No. I didn't really think about that because I've never gone out and truly looked at mass on trees before, especially with oaks. And we went scouting maybe about a month ago, and you actually brought that up when we were looking. And you're like, yeah, look at those overhanging branches. Don't look directly in the canopy, because I was looking right in the canopy and you can't see crap because there's so many leaves. And the second you started looking at those overhanging branches, there's one. Oh, there's a whole bunch there. Yep. There's a bunch on this tree.
Yep.
And it's so much easier to see it that way. So yeah, that's a really good tip.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually did a little bit of that this past weekend. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We also got a Q&A section at the end of the show. So actually, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually go to the show notes and see the timestamps and kind of skip around to whatever you need to. But before that, this is the outro for the Kalamazoo episode where you were up at the Mobile Hunters Expo in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and you did another kind of quick hitter episode where you had a bunch of northern guys on. Mm-hmm. You had Dan Infalt, Andy May, a bunch of guys like that. And it's just kind of like a fun, fast-paced episode. So what were your thoughts on it after doing it at the Southern show and then going up to the Northern show and talking to those guys?
First of all, there's a lot of really good deer hunters up there. A lot of really good deer hunters. Yeah, maybe they don't hunt a lot of the same stuff we hunt down south, as in the habitat's maybe a little bit different, timing of the year is different, all that kind of stuff. But they're still really good deer hunters for their area of the country. And it was interesting kind of picking their brain and figuring out what helped them be successful, as in one of the most important factors for them to have the consistent success they've had. And that it was really interesting getting a lot of people's thought processes. One that I want to kind of dive into, which was the very first interview, which was with Andy May, who at some point this year, hopefully we're going to get Andy on the podcast. We've kind of played back and forth trying to get him on the show, and just hasn't worked out quite yet, but he's a great guy. And when I opened up with that question with him, one thing he talked about was trying to be aggressive. He's a full-time teacher, so he doesn't have a ton of time to get off work and go hunt for extended periods of days like some of our other guests. Some of our guests that we have on the podcast, they can do that. They can go out there. They can spend a ton of time out in the field. And because of that, they can kind of slowly work their way into spots and really kind of I guess
hunt your way into a buck.
Dissect an area.
Yeah.
Where Andy doesn't get that opportunity typically. He's only can hunt for a couple days because he's taking these 3-day weekend trips to go different places and hunt out of state. So the second he gets an eye on, said deer or the sign he's looking for, he's trying to move in and be extremely aggressive. And that's something that I've been guilty of not doing enough, even on some of these hunts when you have a long, period of time to hunt, is not being aggressive enough in some of those cases. Like with the deer's doing something very specific at that timing of the season, you need to go in there and execute as quickly as possible on that pattern as you're witnessing or seeing the sign. And I thought that was a really impactful thing, because that's something that I think a lot of the weekend warriors that listen to this podcast that don't have the time to go hunt during the week can really take initiative from and key in on what Andy was really discussing on being more aggressive. And a lot of that comes with confidence. And being aggressive and having confidence doing so is a fine line, because you kind of go back and forth. It's like you can be super aggressive, but if you don't know what the hell you're doing, there's a very good chance you're just not going to have any success. Mm-hmm. But it's as you're building that confidence in the habitat that you're hunting, the terrain that you're hunting, and where you're actually seeing some of these deer, is keying in on those patterns. and going in and being aggressive during the right time of the year. And that's something that I think Andy really highlighted that, again, I'm going to personally use this year more so is trying to become more aggressive in different situations. When you see something happen, act on it. Don't hold back and wait, because I'm notorious about doing that. Notorious about like, man, let's just sit back and see what happens instead of making a move and trying to make something happen much earlier on in a hunt.
Yeah, Andy's a guy that we've had a lot of people actually write in wanting us to get him on the podcast. So it was good to get him on that segment, but it'll be really fun to get him on for a longer episode and like really dissect what he's doing, because I think that is like kind of his whole thing is he's like extremely efficient. Like It's really impressive, man.
And this
he's putting down great deer every season.
Absolutely. And the thing is, and we get people that write in like this all the time. It drives me crazy just a little bit, but I understand where you're all coming from. Is a lot of guys, a lot of people that are listening to this podcast look at this and they're like, well, man, he doesn't live in Alabama, he doesn't live in Georgia, he doesn't live in Mississippi, so like what he talks about isn't relative, or any of these other guests that we had on this episode. And that's just not the case. If you go in with that closed-minded perspective that if someone doesn't hunt exactly where you're at, that I can't take any information from them, you truly are going to shorten your learning curve. Or actually, not shorten your learning curve. You're going to lengthen your learning curve and also shorten your success by not taking bits and pieces of maybe what he does or these other guests that we had on, and maybe seeing how I can apply them in my own area. So that's one of my biggest gripes I hear from people all the time is, man, they don't live where I hunt. They don't live in the Southeast. They don't hunt in the Southeast, so I can't take what they're saying and apply down here. And that's just not the case. Every time we have somebody on this podcast, the reason why they're on this show is because me and Andrew see enough value in what they do to be able to kind of relay it back to you guys. And we think there's enough value there that there's something we can take from them and then go and apply it. So I think if you go in with that perspective of, hey, even though this person or these people don't live where I live, I can still find something that they do and somehow figure out how to potentially apply it down here. I'm telling you, you're going to learn a lot quicker, and you're going to have a lot more success a lot quicker as well in your journey as a whitetail hunter.
To play devil's advocate a little bit, I guess when we started this show, it came from a lot of deer hunting media. And Andy is, he's been known for a while. He was part of a lot of that deer hunting media that we were listening to before we started this show. And, when they're talking about hunting in cornfields and CRP and all this stuff that we like literally just don't have down here, it can be really hard to like draw something from that appears useful. I think that where you find the like golden nuggets are more in like, I guess, like the principles of what he's doing.
Yeah, it's not where he hunts, it's how he hunts. And is there a way I can take how he hunts? Like, say he's talking about hunting in ag country. How can I use that potentially in areas with huge clear cuts? A 2-year-old clear cut, 3-year-old clear cut's as thick as a cornfield, okay? You're not seeing the deer if he's out in there. A 4-year-old clear cut, you're not going to see him if he's out there, but he's still using it. It's his bedding area, and it's his feeding location, just like a cornfield. Cornfield, they'll bed in, and they'll feed in it. So it's taking what someone says, like in an example like this, ag, like, yeah, we live in an area, we don't have a lot of ag where we're at. There's other places in the Southeast you may have a little bit more ag than we have here in Alabama. But taking that out of consideration, thinking of what kind of habitat is he hunting in, is there any way I can draw a conclusion or a thought between, say, that ag and, say, clear cuts, okay, for example. Like if you have a 200-acre clear cut that's 2 years old, to me, that would remind me a lot of a 200-acre cornfield, except the only thing is it's not coming in there. No one's coming in there. A farmer's not coming to that clear cut and completely removing all that the understory of that clear cut. So it's like a cornfield that's around year-round that never gets cut, so you can never see into it all that well, and you're really hunting the edges, and you're hunting that travel around those edges. So that is kind of more so my perspective on this stuff. And also, like Andrew said, like you mentioned, the principles of what they do. What is their thought process going into a hunt, no matter where they hunt at, and what is their mentality going in, and how can we take that mentality and then apply it as Southerners? And another perspective as well, you had mentioned, like Andy's been on a bunch of shows. Dan Infault, who's on this episode as well, has been on a bunch of other podcasts. They hunt and stuff that I can't necessarily relate with a whole bunch. Some of it I can. Some of the habitat I can, because I've hunted a bunch of different states now and had different experiences in different areas. But it's what are they thinking when they go into the field and their mindset and building confidence based off where they're hunting at. That's where I think you can draw it out. And again, from our perspective as Southerners, I think the value you have of getting them on like a show like ours is you're getting a Southerner to ask hopefully the right questions that another Southerner is going to want to know when you're talking to a guy from Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota or Ohio or Illinois or anything like that. What is the question that a Southerner would want to ask those people instead of a Midwestern or Midwestern, which maybe isn't thinking through the eyes of what we deal with down here in the Southeast?
Yeah, like I haven't got to interview Andy yet, but like when we get him on, I'm not gonna be very interested about how like he maybe keys in on a specific, I don't know, setup with like a cornfield or whatever. Like how does he use that inside corner? Like that's not something that I'm gonna probably ask a whole bunch about because I'm like it's not that applicable to me. I'm just not that interested in it. What I am interested in is his mindset and how he approaches a property, how he approaches a buck. And it doesn't necessarily have to be laid out like he's hunting the same kind of pine thicket that I'm hunting, but I want to know like what is going through his head, what gives him the confidence to go in there, what is he building off of? It's like how can you possibly go to a place for 3 days and kill a buck like that and do it consistently?
Yeah.
Like what is your mindset like and what frame of mind do you have to be in?
I'll tell you another. I'll play a little devil's advocate with you too. A lot of our listeners that listen to this podcast, not everybody, but I'd say there's a decent group of you all. Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 50%. That at some point, if you're hunting, I'm going to call it a career, like over your life as you whitetail hunt, you're going to want to go travel to one of these Midwestern states and go and hunt. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I think another value you get out of potentially interviewing some of these guys, and maybe get into some of those specifics on how he hunts some of those habitat edges and those habitat features. Maybe you could just give an example of ag. Is if I want to go to Ohio or Illinois or Iowa or Nebraska or any of these other states and potentially hunt, what is something I can take from him and then derive as a Southerner and put into my own perspective of if I ever get the chance to go and hunt those areas, how can I use what, again, a guy like, say, Andy May is doing in order for me to be successful if I travel out of the state and go hunt one of those areas? Funny enough that you brought that up. Buddy of the podcast, Jeremy Aaron from Do It Yourself Hunter on YouTube, he reached out to me because I was telling him, we were going to go up to this Michigan show for the Mobile Hunters Expo that, we're going to have feedback from people like, man, they don't live in the South. I don't really care about listening to them. And he had a really good perspective. Just like I mentioned, is like, okay, maybe, they don't hunt exactly where you're at, but if you're ever interested in going to an area where maybe there is higher densities of bigger bucks and you truly want to go experience a Midwestern hunt, these are some of the guys you need to listen to. These are the guys that kind of take notes on because these guys are successful there. Like, and like Andy gave an example, he hunts a bunch of different states as a non-resident for a very short window of time, just a few days, and is successful doing so. Well, there's something that you can take from guys like that and then go apply if that's ever on your wish list of going and doing one of those trips, especially DIY on public land or knocking on doors, or if you wanted to go hunt with outfitter, it doesn't matter, but you're taking information from these, again, skilled hunters from a different area of the country and applying it if you decided to do something like that. Now, a lot of you may not care about going and hunt out of state. Maybe you just want to hunt your home state, whether it's South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, or wherever in the Southeast, and that's perfectly fine. But there's always something worth value about picking these guys' brains that are successful hunters in their own light, in their own areas, and seeing what can you pull away from there through these conversations of these podcasts to then go out and apply yourself, whether it's in your home state or if you decided to go travel to another state, maybe in the upper Midwest.
One thing I immediately noticed when I was going through this edit and listening to what everyone was talking about is, I don't know how many of them, but several of them mentioned observation sets. And that being a big thing for each and every one of them is like they want to do an observation sit and they want to get eyes on a buck. I think Dan Infalt mentioned that specifically. What's your take on that out of curiosity?
It goes back, just like Scott Seals talks about doing observation hunts in Alabama. Mm-hmm. You can still do it in the Southeast. It just depends on where and what habitat you're hunting in. I think it's a fantastic option. I think it's something that I haven't done much of really in the past. I try to go in and when I am aggressive, I try to go into a spot where you probably can't see very far, and you're just hoping that you have the opportunity of that buck to come by you through this, travel corridor or wherever you're hunting on. But where they're at, especially if you're in some of these habitats where it's a little bit more open, which I, again, go back to it, kind of playing, not devil's advocate, but kind of going back to the whole, like, say, clear cut or cut over areas where there's logging going on. They're coming in, they're cutting all the trees out of different parcels. You can do observation sits on those, too. And we talked about that, whether you have a climber, whether you have standing sticks, or whether you're using a saddle and sticks, you can get extremely high in a tree close to it and do an observation set, even if it's during bow season, and look over a huge area, especially like a 1 or 2 year old clear cut where the deer are going to come out and feed and that kind of stuff. Get up extremely high, big elevation point, and look out over all that stuff and try to pinpoint where deer are coming in and out of those clear cuts and feeding. And Scott talks about doing it in a very much more, I guess you could say, a tighter funnel area where he's doing it in SMZ, stream side management zones, these hardwood drainages in this timber country where they're not logging the creek bottoms. You have all these little fingers of hardwoods going everywhere. He's talking about doing observation sits even early season because he's not using trail cameras a whole bunch in those areas where there's feed trees where he may back off an observation sit for Scott might be 80 yards off a couple feed trees. And he's kind of, he's in the area that he could kill one, but he also can see a little bit further back up in these SMZs. So if a buck pops out 100 yards from him or 80 yards from him, he can lay eyes on it, see what it does. If he gets a shot, great. If he doesn't, he then knows how to move into position for the next hunt. And I think a lot of people don't do that enough. We've done observations, if you think about it, sitting very open stuff, whether it's a power line, whether it's a gas line, whether it's a fresh clear cut, whether it's a long, super long food plot where you're talking 400 or 500 yard long food plot, where you can sit and you can watch. You can't watch a very wide area, but you can watch a very long area, and you can see where deer are crossing at, whether you're hunting with a gun or with a bow. And then you can take that information and make a move to an area in order to get a shot opportunity.
Oh, yeah, I've actually done that. I mentioned that in the outro not long ago, actually, where like if I was just going to tell someone to go kill a doe or something with a rifle, probably and you weren't hunting like a food plot or something, probably the easiest way to do that is go get on a power line where you can see really, really far and sit there. And if you see if a doe comes out, within range, shoot her. If not, and you start seeing them cross like 300 yards down over the hill, then get up and move over there, and boom, good to go. And also another thing is you can actually, a lot of guys in the Midwest who have bean fields and other stuff like that at their disposal, they'll go out and do summertime like buck inventory, glassing and whatnot. You can do the same exact thing with fresh clear cuts.
No, we've done it.
I know people, I've done it. I know people who've done it, but this time of year, they'll go out early in the morning especially, and just go sit on a clear cut, like right there at daylight, and see big bucks.
Yeah.
And that's a great way where you're going to see deer. You don't have to be super invasive. You don't have to get way down in there and put a camera out and then go check it a million times and leave your boot tracks in there where other people can see it. You can just go sit on a hill where you have a good vantage point. Again, get you a good pair of binos and actually glass and put eyes on the deer. And, they're going to move, but you know that they exist.
Yeah.
You know that they're alive in that area. And actually, in this cutover country, a lot of times we found that they don't actually relocate that far. Every deer is different, but man, we've had it to where we kill them, feet from where we got them on camera in the summertime. They just kind of always hang around there. So that's a good way to apply it as well. But I sense that this subject fires you up a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You seem a little passionate about it.
No, I'm just on today. I feel real good today. Feel good.
You got your little Zen pouch in?
Yeah, dude. 20 pounds down, feeling good, looking good. It's like, okay, rocking and rolling. Also, another thing about observation sits, on the flip side, another way you can use observation sits, I think, in the Southeast, if you're hunting big river bottoms, okay? Like guys like Michael Ball, who's been on the podcast, Richard Fott, Jonathan Moreland, I'm trying to think of some of those river bottom guys.
Jeremy Aaron?
Carter.
Robert Carter.
Robert Carter. Yeah, Jeremy Aaron. You can set up, especially if it's not in the rut necessarily. If you're in an area that's fairly open hardwoods in a river bottom, but there's like water features, there's low cover, like low brush, that's kind of like keeping the deer kind of hidden as they're going through. But if you get elevated, you can see through that stuff. You can do an observation sit and that kind of stuff as well, and get a really good visual. Stay off your phone, which I'm terrible about doing. Phone saved more deer, more bucks' lives than anything else I've ever had. But you could do an observation sit in that same standpoint. Also, you could do the same thing in big mature pines in an area that maybe had just been recently thinned, or maybe they're kind of matured out, but there's a good terrain feature that the deer are kind of going through, even though it's a little open. You could climb up and, again, do an observation sit, whether you're bow hunting or gun hunting, and put it all out there in front of you so you know where you should move in. Because the cool thing about the observation sit, and this is something, I did this a little bit last year in Arkansas, done in Iowa a lot just because it's real open. I'm trying to think Alabama done it much. Not recently. But you're able to get more information in one sit than you could with 3 or 4 trail cameras out there, at least in that time period, because you're able to see, if you can see a couple hundred yards in an area, you could truly see what's going on around you 360 degrees if you're in the right spot, and it sets up like that, where you can truly have an idea of how deer are moving through, and based off how the does are coming through, the bucks are coming through, everything else. You can then make that position, make that move, whether it's that day or the next day, and go in there and get exactly where they're crossing at, whether you're bow hunting or you're hunting with a gun, get within range and get shot opportunities.
My caveat to that is I don't do a lot of observation sits unless I'm in a new area. Because, like, I do them here in Alabama, and I've done them in Georgia. And I think I've done them in Tennessee as well, like in timber, like cutover country, not like ag or whatever. My only caveat is if I'm trying to learn an area or still figure something out, that's when I'm probably going to do an observation sit. But once I kind of know an area, like my hunting club last year, I did what I would consider an observation sit last year. This year, I'm not doing that again. Because I know where they should be. So if I have time, if I've got 15 minutes, or whatever, I'm going to go sit where I can kill it, if it comes out. So that's just, I don't know, that's like the caveat I'd put on it is like if you're really familiar with your area, I don't think there's like a need to kind of waste a hunt on an observation sit. If you already know if you're making a play on where they're going to be moving.
Sure.
If you're trying to learn an area, I think it's a really, really good tool.
Absolutely. I mean, that's how I think all these guys are using it. It's kind of learning an area or what's going on in an area. Even if they're familiar with it, I'm going to hold back, climb up, and to see what I can see, and then based off what the deer are doing at that specific time of the season, then make a play on that specifically. So
yeah, definitely.
Of course, a guy I wanted, I've been wanting to get on the podcast for a while now, was Dan Infault, who was on this episode, and he was a super busy guy, he was a super fun guy to talk to, very funny. Like his humor is very specific. It's very Dan Infault. It's hilarious. Like you start talking to Dan, I'm like, dude, everything's coming out of him. It's just, if he's not being serious, he's pretty much joking the whole time. And his thought process on, that buck sign and what a lot of guys do wrong, where they kind of keep hunting the same spots over and over again and they don't decide to move, I think is a huge aspect. And also like how he uses the hunting pressure, which let me tell you right now, a lot of us Southerners say we've got bad hunting pressure down here, okay? And I've said it. Andrew's said it. Andrew's experienced it. I've experienced some stuff. I know a lot of you guys have experienced some, like, terrible, what you would think is terrible hunting pressure. Personally, I've never experienced hunting pressure that he talked about, where, like, you go to a 1,000-acre tract of public, and there's 40 to 50 trucks sitting there for 1,000 acres.
I can't even.
And I'm like,
do you think he's exaggerating?
No, because I talked to 3 or 4 other guys.
When they say, but they're like, oh, there's like 50 trucks there. Or are they saying there is literally 50
They're driving
trucks?
a road. So Dan talked about this, not in this episode, but he did it in one of his seminars, that some of those days when, like, say, like a gun season comes in, or if it's like getting close to the rut, he may hold out of the woods and drive around. I talked to a couple other guys to do this, drive around the public and see where everybody's parked at, and that's when they're counting trucks. And they're talking about 10, 15, 20 trucks to a parking area, parked along the side of the roads and everything, as they're driving around it.
So, okay, there was a place in Georgia that I hunted that was like roughly 4,000 acres. And I did that one time because I drew a quota hunt there, and they gave out like 200 permits for 4,000 acres. And I drove around, and I did that exact thing because I couldn't find a freaking spot. So I started just driving around, and I was dropping pins on every truck that I found because I was curious about how many there were, and also I was trying to map it out like spatially so I could get on the map and see if I could figure out where people were basically not going, which ended up working. I passed a buck that I kind of wish I had shot that hunt, but I counted 43 trucks.
Yeah,
that on 4,000 acres of the place you hunted it.
Yeah,
and that was like you could hardly find a place to pull over. So that's why I'm like, if it's 1,000 acres and it's 50 trucks, like, I don't know about that.
I'm just telling you. And then also, I talked to a couple other guys, like Johnny Stewart, who was on this episode as well. So not to gloss over Dan, it was just interesting hearing Dan's talk on, again, just discussing in detail about like the overlook spots that he kind of mentioned on this episode. And then also just, again, what he sees guys doing wrong is, a lot of people just want to walk as far as possible, and you just walk yourself right back into the pressure instead of looking at those really thick areas that a lot of guys are walking past because they don't want to get through that. And then the bucks are right there.
Hey, you're going to talk about something that relates to Southerners. Even though they're not hunting in the South,
So let me tell you, well, another thing about that. So I started looking at numbers. I think Alabama in 2020, I think it was 2020, 2021 season, it was a total like 200-something thousand licenses were sold in Alabama.
Yep.
I think in Wisconsin it's 300-something thousand just for bow hunters. and the thing is, and I was talking to all these guys, all that pressure, like they have a lot more public up in, say, like Wisconsin than we do down here in Alabama. But where a lot of the big bucks come from is that southeast, southwest corner of Iowa. So a lot of those guys are buying those licenses.
Wisconsin, you mean?
Oh, sorry, Wisconsin. What did I say? Iowa?
Yeah.
Okay, I meant Wisconsin. Head south, and they go hunt all that marsh stuff down south just because there's a chance you can kill a 180-inch deer down there. So, like, not only do they have that many bow hunters, not counting gun hunters, a lot of them move down south, and like I was talking about, so that's where Dan's seeing like a lot of this pressure. And I talked to a couple other guys over there that were like, yeah, it's insane. Like, there's, you hunt during October, it's not too crazy, but come November, it's insane down there, or up there. But I talked to guys like Garrett Frall, and he was talking about like different areas of Wisconsin where like you go to like some of the areas that we grouse hunted. There's a lot of guys that gun hunt it, but you don't have as many guys bow hunt that.
Yeah.
Because it's less desirable, like that kind of habitat, but there's still big deer like in those areas.
Yeah.
So it's like,
well, I could see how that could get off the chain really quick, because like condensing people in an area like that, because that's pretty much exactly what we do on gun hunts down here.
Yeah.
You're taking like all the people who want to gun hunt on public land, and then you give them 3 gun days in the rut, and like everybody's coming, and that's when we get those really crazy days. But that doesn't happen with bow hunting down here.
No, but this is
and that happens with bow hunting
up there. That's what
crazy.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it's like they're on a level of hunting pressure that like I'm still trying to comprehend. And again, I talked to all these guys, pretty much everybody I interviewed, and they're all like, "This is what I see." It's like this kind of hunting pressure. Now every state's a little bit different, but to kind of get over, I was going to talk about like with Garrett Frall, he was talking about that like, sometimes he'll hunt in those areas, and other times he'll hunt to other parts of, say, Wisconsin, just because he knows there's going to be less pressure there, and be able to key in on other areas instead of having to focus and, like, battle your way out trying to hunt a spot where you get 10 guys trying to kill the exact same buck, and they're hunting, like, the nighttime sign, and that's what Dan's talking about. Like, everybody's trying to kill this buck, but it's like, this buck isn't where they think it is because of the hunting pressure. Like, it's relocated. And he's like, I'm trying to find him where he's relocating at. And I was like, okay, that's super kind of interesting, just from our perspective of like, paying attention to some of that kind of stuff. Also, so Johnny Stewart was another guy I had on this episode. Johnny's a great guy. He's been on the podcast before. He's out of, if I remember right, he's out of PA, Pennsylvania. But Johnny was talking about some similar things, but like he goes and hunts Ohio, and he's like, there's a lot of hunters in Ohio, and he was finding these spots and getting on this specific buck that, you only had like one really good access point, kind of was coming from the top, it kind of dropped down, big thermal hubs going down to some ag below, and all these guys are trying to hunt up by the access point, up in these kind of more open woods with their sun, but he's like, it's either young deer doing it or it's completely nocturnal sun. Like, you're not going to kill a deer there. And he's having to walk past guys in their stand in order to try to kill this buck further down this thermal hub, down this drainage, this connection of different drainages all coming down, which is the thermal hub, and trying to kill a buck down there. And he had a couple encounters with it, never got a great opportunity at him. But again, kind of battling some of that pressure during bow season, which typically we've never ever really experienced, like bow hunting pressure like that.
Absolutely not.
So that's kind of another interesting factor as well. But it was just interesting getting all these guys on the show, and figuring out like what's like some of those most like important factors that they've learned in order to help them have repeatable success, or consistent success. And I think that's a big takeaway for all of us is, yeah, these guys probably don't hunt in the same area that 98% of you guys listening and watching right now hunt in, but there's things that you can take away from, especially maybe how they deal with hunting pressure, sign reading, observation hunts, and everything else, and seeing is how you could apply even just 1% of what was discussed maybe down where you're at and hopefully have some success doing so. Yeah. Because the funny thing is, I met some guys at this show that were listeners of the podcast who live in Michigan using the tactics that we're talking about on the podcast with the guests, and they're directly applying up there.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's kind of cool.
So it goes both way, everybody. It goes both way, both north to south, but it's, again, I think it's a little bit different when you have that southerner perspective asking some of the questions and diving deeper on this stuff than when you have like a Midwestern talking to a Midwestern dude. So that's my take on it.
Absolutely. A couple months back, me and you scouted a little swampy area, threw a trail camera out, and this past weekend I was actually able to go get that camera. So, basically, you want to kind of rehash that spot real quick, and just kind of describe like where the camera is at.
I mean, let's talk about it. So, you got an area, some kind of flat, swampy, kind of like that kind of flat hardwoods habitat. They got a slough coming off, a big slough with a big beaver dam coming across it.
Yep.
That kind of dissects it right across. Which typically, if you're ever hunting these areas where you have a lot of water, if you find a big beaver dam, the deer are going to be using it. And that's something you hear about some of these Midwestern guys talk about, but it directly affects down here in the Southeast, and it's applicable down here as well. And we went into that spot. That was the first spot you want to check out. And the second we got there, it's just tracks everywhere.
Yeah.
Dude. And there was a persimmon tree
Andrew knows
there.
how to read a map. I knew it. Yeah, dude. That spot in particular is the beaver dam that attracted me to it, because we've had, I can't even remember who now, but we've had several people talk about beaver dams specifically. And one guy who we're still trying to get on the show, who we haven't got on yet, who talks about beaver dams being a really good place for deer to like cross these sloughs.
Who is this?
Wes's buddy. I'm completely blanking.
Scott?
Yeah, Scott
Smith.
Yeah, so trying to get Scott on. But he talks about beaver dams, you know. So I wanted to go check it out because of that. And just because of how you know, if you get a little creative and how you access this, you can come in the back door where everybody else is going to be coming from the opposite direction and pushing deer to you potentially. So we found that beaver dam, a lot of tracks, scrapes, a lot of scrapes going down the edge of the slough.
Bunch of pig sign kind of adjacent to it.
Bunch of pig sign. I go walking in there on Friday, and the pig sign. So last time we were in there, the pig sign didn't start till a couple hundred yards past that beaver dam crossing. That's when it really picked up. This time, as soon as I got off the road, I hit pig sign.
Oh, like, really? They moved up that far?
Oh, yeah. Huh. And when I was walking through there, when I got down by the water, like everything was disturbed. Like everything. It wasn't all rooted, but it's like everything just looked like unsettled. You know, like all the leaves are all over the place. Sticks are broken. It's quiet when you walk through there because I've trampled it so much. And I was like, holy crap. Okay, I guess we got some pigs in here. So I get up to the camera, and where this beaver dam crosses, there's like a little like bare dirt spot right there where the water kind of comes up and down and fluctuates, so it kind of washes all the leaves out of there. Well, right there, that's what the camera's looking at, because that's where the deer are crossing, and there's a big old freaking wallow right there in the middle of the camera. So I was like, well, I know what we're going to have on this camera. But there were so many tracks around. It almost looked like how when people put out like a mineral station, and the deer just like eat everything. There's tracks all over the place. And they're like eating the dirt and all that. Well, it looked like that, but it was hog and deer tracks all kind of like intermixed together. So I climb up there. I get the card. Do what?
By the way, what's a hog track look like compared to a deer track?
A hog track is almost like two lemon wedges next to each other, meaning that if you take a lemon wedge, it's got like obviously like the round side, it's shaped like a C, and then it's got the straight side. The two straight sides are like facing each other. So if you look at a deer track, it almost looks like a heart, and it kind of comes to a point. A pig track is like they're two parallel to each other like that. If you're watching on video right now,
and they're
just
rounded.
Like that. Yeah, it's round. It's real rounded on the edges, and then in between the two like sides of the hoof, it's like straight lines. And usually the dew claws are there too. Almost always the dew claws are there, and they might be. When I was first trying to figure out the difference between a pig track and a deer track, I was like, oh, is that a pig track? Is that a pig track? And then I found a pig track, and I was like, that's a pig track. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like that much of a difference. And especially when they're kind of interspersed there next to each other, you can really, really tell the difference. But I would just Google some images of it. Like, they're pretty distinct. So there's tracks all over the place. I pull the camera, start going through, and, dude, we got some big old pigs on there. I'm talking about some nice ones. So, I don't know. I'm not thrilled about it, but I'm not also, not that upset, because I would not be upset if that biggest one came walking by, because it's a big hog.
Thwack.
Yeah, for real. Yeah. It is a really, really big hog. So
do some broadhead testing.
Yeah, for real. There was a decent number of deer on the camera. I got a lot of daytime activity, both from the hogs and the deer. There's one doe group of 3 does that was coming through, and 2 of the does are pregnant, it looks like. One of them didn't look pregnant. But they came through pretty consistent. I got a doe coming through that has a jacked up leg. I think she got bit by a snake.
Looks like it. It's all
swollen. So I'll throw that in the YouTube version of this. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that. And let's see, what else? There was one buck on there, like a little forkhorn. Nothing special. But, decent doe traffic, so a lot of hog stuff. I got a bunch of videos of hogs rooting around, and we were watching it earlier, and it's just like kind of crazy.
It's amazing how much dirt they can move like that.
Oh, dude, they just, I don't even know how they do it. They just stick their face in the ground.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, what are you even digging with? Because I'm like, I don't know, it's weird. Like, they imagine that's your whole existence. You dig in the ground with your face to eat stuff. Like, you got to dig a hole with your face. So
it's a rough life.
Yeah, hard living. But yeah, there's a bunch of smaller ones on there, and then there's a couple of real big ones, and might try to go pop one here soon.
Yeah. But so let me ask you. No good bucks on camera. No mature deer. No deer over probably a year and a half old.
Well, I mean, the does are older. But
buck-wise.
No. There's only one buck, and he's probably a year and a half
That's
old.
what I'm saying. So, like, buck-wise, there's nothing over a year and a half old on it. So, where do you think those mature bucks are at that was leaving all that sign?
Probably back there where all those fallen trees are at.
I think so.
Yeah. At least more back that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong. But I just didn't see any big tracks either. Like nothing that got me that excited. So they're not there. I think they're going to come there in the rut. That I didn't really think that we were going to have like a bunch of giant bucks walking back and forth across that beaver dam. I think they're going to be maybe more secluded, more interior, if you know what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You being familiar with this place. I think they're going to be, I don't know, somewhere more secluded, somewhere with more shade and more cover.
Yeah.
Because there's just not a ton of cover in there at all. There's a decent breeze coming off the lake, but nothing crazy. So I don't know. It doesn't really get me discouraged in that spot at all. I think that in the rut, I think if you hunt it at the right time, it's going to be a really good spot because I do think that area is holding a decent number of does. I was encouraged by how many different does are on this camera, and I was encouraged at how well the travel pattern matched up with what we thought it would be because deer, hog, doesn't matter. They were either going this way or this way. They were either crossing that dam or parallel in the water. And it was perfect. Like every one of them was walking those two directions. And that's what that beaver dam essentially is because you're getting the traffic of the deer that are walking the edge of the water. They're walking the shoreline. And then you got the deer that are crossing the dam. And it comes to a T. So you got an intersection. And that's why that's a good camera spot. So that was encouraging. So I know that they're using that area kind of how we thought they would. And then if you put yourself in there on the right day in the rut, I think it could be really, really good, especially if you access it correctly and cross your T's and dot your I's. I think you could be in a really good situation. So overall, encouraged. I'm not writing that spot off by any means after being in there twice now and kind of looking around and running a camera for a little while. I just don't know what kind of bucks are in there. That's the only thing. I'm sure there's a buck in there that I'd be willing to shoot, because I don't have the highest standards. But anyways, yeah, I'm still excited about that spot. I think we could probably find something better though. But if we didn't find something better, I wouldn't be bummed about hunting that spot.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. So.
Nah, I already know some other spots. You can hunt that spot. I don't want to hunt that spot one bit. That's Andrew's spot. I'm going to find some greener pastures.
So what turned you off about that spot?
Too open.
Yeah, it's pretty open.
Too open.
Yeah, it's too open.
I mean, it kind of goes back to the whole observation sit. You can do observation sit there for sure, but it's just like unless he's coming right up that water line or he's coming across that beaver dam, there's no other cover for 150 yards. Maybe not that far. 100. Yeah, probably 100, 120 yards.
Probably about. Yeah.
So I'm not a huge fan of that aspect compared to like what we found where all those down trees are at with that straight line wind.
Yep.
That gets me amped. Like. Again, that like there's going to be there's good cover, there's going to be sunlight. It's probably already way thicker there now, or a little bit thicker now compared to what it was that first time we went back in there a couple months ago.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And to me, that just sets up so much better.
The road was thicker.
Well, it's like if you're trying to kill a mature buck, that's where I think you've got to push into. Like you've got to get back and some of that stuff. Where like you can still see a little bit, but he's got a ton of cover around him, and there's probably going to be a little bit better food sources there. Other than there's going to be isolated mass first off, for only because the trees they're left standing versus the ones that are laying on the ground. Number two, during the rut, you have all that thick cover in those travel corridors between all those down trees that kind of funnels them down to like different hubs of like movement. And then number three on it, it's even more isolated. It's kind of the spot like if people come in from an access point, that's where those deer are running to.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I didn't clarify enough. That's what I'm talking about doing. So when I say like I think the bucks are more isolated further back, that's where I think that they're at right now. I think that's where they're gonna be if they're not there right now. But also the the particular spot the camera was at, you couldn't really hunt that how I'm wanting to hunt it. Like, sure, you could like maybe go in there and like hunt that scrape line at the right time, but at the end of the day, that spot I think will really shine with the pressure on gun days and stuff, where people are going to be pushing the deer back. And I was encouraged to see the doe travel up and down the beaver dam, up and down the shoreline, and seeing so many does right there where they're gonna get bumped out of there. That's what's encouraging to me, because you could come in the backside and hunt where all the much thicker cover is, which we covered this in depth on a outro a couple weeks back. Probably should have looked up the episode number, but I think it was like Scouting Swamps or something like that. It's some name. It's from a couple weeks back, like 2 or 3 months ago, and
couple months ago.
Yeah, I get tied up, but no, I think that they're gonna get pushed back to that, and that's where you catch them, is back in that stuff. But I'm excited to see how many does are using like the, I don't know, there's not really a better word for it, but like the quote unquote front country of that spot. Everything up close to the road, the does are using. People are going to be coming in off that road. It's just a deer drive, like right to you. And they're going to go punch back into that more isolated cover, and we have bona fide access to that spot. So it should be in really good shape. Oh, Thomas is calling. I'll get all Thomas on the podcast.
That would be hilarious.
So anyways, that went pretty good. And then I skipped over and I went to a different spot that we hadn't been to yet. Little different area, same objective. Go in there and locate funnels, thicker cover, stuff that where we can use pressure to our advantage.
Another area.
Yeah. Did you not see on the story where I posted? So, okay, another area out there that we were interested in that we got some tips on from some listeners. A place that I've been to a little bit.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
So I went in there, and my goal was to just go and scout some of these major funnels. And again, slough heads are like really what I'm interested in, but also there's what appears to be a pine thicket in there, and this pine thicket comes down and comes up to a pretty decent pinch point. And I went in there to that pinch point, and the pinch point didn't really pan out like I thought it would. It just didn't look that good on the ground. Not something that I would hunt at all. But the pine thicket looked fantastic. It looked very, very thick and nasty. And in fact, I found out how thick and nasty it was because, as I often do, I'm like, well, I'll just cut through here. Because I could see on the map there's a little road through the interior of it, like an old logging road. And I'm like, it's probably grown up, but I can probably shoot through there. Man, that was a mistake. So I start down this road, and we've been having all these like crazy freaking thunderstorms lately. So one of these thunderstorms start rolling in, and I'm like 1.2 miles from the truck, so I'm not that far. But I'm like, it's starting to get a little sketchy, and the wind's starting to whip. I'm like, all right, I got to get out of here. So I'm looking at the map, and I'm like, well, I can just cut right through these pines. If I can find like a little path going through them, I can cut through here, and it's going to shave off, 3/4 of a mile for my walk, because I was trying to make a loop. And I hit this road, and I start walking through, and it's pretty dense. Well, the wind hits me in the face, and it is just like, the strongest hog smell. Like distinct in your face, like there's hogs right up there. I can smell them. And so I'm like, okay, I don't really want to run into a hog in this thicket where I can't see more than like 3 feet. So I just keep walking, and I'm getting closer and closer to the smell. And dude, it is getting...
So you keep going, even though...
I'm like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to get killed by the storm. Hey, piggy. Dude, I start walking, and I got my pistol with me, and it got so strong that I drew my pistol. And I'm like walking, and I'm just like, this is sketchy. And I was kind of making some noise. I was like breaking some stuff, trying to make myself known. Dude, I get up there, and first of all, if I wanted to kill a hog, this is where I'd go. If I was going to go like hunt this weekend. There's like overhanging limbs on this road where there's trees growing on either side, and there's limbs hanging over it.
Perfect licking branches.
No, they're too low for that. They're like knee high. Okay. But underneath them is like a water hole where these hogs like had just been wallowing, and there was like wet leaves, like where you can see they had just gotten up and like walked out, like still wet. I probably scared them off of it. And they were like, there was a hog trail like just worn down that freaking logging path. And I was walking that path because I was hoping to find some licking branches and some rubs. Nothing. Couldn't find anything, which, this time of year that stuff can be kind of hard to see, so I'm not writing it off. But the woods around this pine thicket, were very open and very unproductive looking. So it's a lot of smaller trees. They're like that big around, you know.
Audio listeners, how big?
They're like as big around as like
how many inches we talking?
I don't know, like 6 to 8 inches. A lot of them, and most of them.
Is that what you tell Tiffany? I was looking at video. People can see what he was doing.
Anyways, God,
you gotta leave that in the podcast. That's perfect.
Anyways, a lot of it's like sweet gum and other unproductive trees. There some water oaks kind of scattered throughout, but they're all pretty small. Don't look very productive, and you can see.
Oh, they're small. Okay, I thought you meant the pines are small, but the pines are bigger.
No, the pines are bigger.
Okay.
You could jack up a climber in these pines.
Gotcha.
And the pines are thick underneath. The woods around it are open.
Oh, has it been thinned? Does it look like?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's why they're thick.
Oh, yeah, they're thick underneath. They're
Gotcha.
really thick. Thick enough where I was walking through expecting to get snake bit at any moment. And I tried to cut through, and I got like maybe halfway through them, and I just couldn't do it. Like I had to turn around, like they were that thick. And so I kept bouncing and turning around and coming back out and then trying to go back in and until I could find something thin enough.
Did you ever truck around on X when you were doing this?
Yes.
I would love to see those like little views as you're like, crap, I can't go this way, keep backing
Oh,
up.
it hurt because I was wearing the Trace pants, and the Trace pants from First Light, they're a great warm weather pant, and that's why I wore them that day. But don't wear them if you're going to go into a big old briar patch because they ain't for that.
Yep.
They're not going to protect you, and they did not protect me. I got jacked up.
Corrugate Foundry pant. That's the pant.
Yeah,
if you're going
Corrugate
through
Foundry.
briars.
That's the one. And I was thinking that when I was walking through, I was like, "Dadgummit," because I almost grabbed him, but it's so freaking hot. I'm like, I'm gonna wear the Trace pants.
Suck it up, bro.
Well, I didn't know I'd be in a pine thicket that day. I was not planning on going to a pine thicket. So eventually I found a hog trail, and I followed that hog trail through. And I was stepping over their beds and everything. I was like, man, I found the spot for hogs, and I was able to get out. But that area definitely looks promising, but it's going to take a little bit more scouting, I think. But I could see how it could hold a big deer because, first of all, access is garbage for it. There's terrible access. You got to walk really far to get anywhere. And this is kind of a weird area. Just to like give the listeners some perspective, this area, you can drive into it, and when you look at it on the map, it looks like it's not that big, but when you get out there, you're like, this area is freaking huge. Like you can really cover some ground out there, and you gotta walk a long ways, and it gets pressure, but I think it's pretty predictable where people are going to be hunting, and I think we'll be able to take advantage of that. So people will hear more about it, you know, as time goes on. I definitely want to go give it like one more good scouting day before we go throw a week-long hunt at it. Because we're going to hunt this area in January, but it's very promising, I think. You can definitely see how a deer could get old, because if you're coming from, I'll tell you what, if you're coming from the access that everybody else uses, all these little parking spots and stuff, it would be so hard, I think, to get in and access clean if you're trying to kill a mature deer who's, you know, kind of keen to what's going on, because the woods are so open walking in, it's all flat, and in order to get like a loop on a deer, you're going to have to make a giant J-hook to get in on them, which most people just frankly aren't going to do. We'll do it, but most people won't. So I think this will be kind of fun to maybe pick that parcel apart if we decide to hunt this particular parcel, because it's not that complicated on how to hunt it. There's a couple good-looking pinch points on the map. We'll go in there, focus on those pinch points most likely. But other than that, I think it's just going to come down to access, and it's going to come down to who accesses correctly and who gets in clean and who crosses their T's and dots their I's.
Yep.
So I'm excited about it.
Dude, it sounds good. Sounds real good. But real quick, let's get over. I want to do some Q&As, man.
All right, let's look at some Q&As. Jacob, you want to tell people where they can submit?
Yeah, so Q&As. So again, if you've been listening this summer, you've heard us do a lot of Q&As. So Q&As is where you guys, both listening and watching, can write in. There's a link down in the show notes, whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening at. If you go down to the bottom below the podcast feed, you'll see the show notes, and it'll say submit listener Q&A form. And you submit them on the website, and this is something that we try to answer on these outro episodes, these breakdown episodes. And we've had some really good ones this summer. We've had some great Q&As come in. So it's a great opportunity if you're wanting to actually, kind of get your question read on the show and get our direct thoughts on it, this is the way to do it. We're trying to do this over the whole, y'all messaging us, because it's a lot easier for us to organize these Q&As than it is to go through and make sure we answer everybody's questions on social media and messages like that. So,
yep.
Anyway, we got a good one.
All right.
A couple good ones.
First one is Traven Mills. He said, "Hey guys, big fan of your show. I've been binging the podcast, getting all caught up. You guys are great and have already opened my eyes to some new tactics to try out. I live in northwest Arkansas, about 30 minutes from the Missouri state line. We have lots of hunters here, and most of the time, if you get permission to hunt, you're not the only one hunting there. I feel like the deer are constantly pressured no matter where I go. What are some tips or tactics that you would give to someone in my position? Thanks in advance, and keep doing what y'all do." All right, what you got? He sounds like someone that could benefit from like Dan Infalt and Andy May and all those guys.
I mean, if you're going to hunt permission properties like that and you're going in with the understanding that you're not the only one with permission, that's fine. I mean, you're hunting it just like you would be on public land. If you're hunting public land, you're going to have other people hunting it too. So, that being said, if you can hunt during the week, you have a leg up on everybody else that's hunting it, because most guys are going to be hunting on the weekends. Now, if, like most of you guys, it's hard to hunt on the weekdays, that's something you kind of take in consideration. If you're going to ask for time off work, if you could get, especially like a Tuesday through Thursday off or Friday off, where you can go hunt some of these properties, during the week, I think that'd be tremendous, especially during the rut. Also, in that kind of circumstance, pay attention. Like, if you're on one of these properties, whether it's like 50 acres or whether it's 500 acres that you get permission to, and there's other guys hunting out there as well, as take notes on where you're seeing other guys stand locations at, where you're seeing their trail cameras, where you're seeing people parking at, and use it like you would if you're hunting public land. Go and try to figure out, where are they pushing into? Are they how to put this? Are they a hunter that's considering wind direction when they're hunting, or are they just walking in no matter what the conditions are, and they're going to go hunt their specific spot and they don't care about wind direction?
Yep.
Taking all that into consideration, you try to find the areas that how are deer going to skirt those travel corridors that these stands are in, whether it's on a field, back in the timber, back in transition area, pinch point, whatever, and then look around where their stands at. And is there a way if a buck was going to come through here, and especially if someone's been hunting that property for a while now, and he's kind of learned, and the does have kind of learned to skirt these stand locations, or are they going to go out and key in on those spots? Kind of like what Dan Infalt talked about in this episode is, find those overlooked spots that everybody's kind of walking past, or they don't want to necessarily get into, because overlooked spots could be super far in, or they'll be super close to the truck, or anywhere in between. It's just going through that thicker stuff that people don't want to go through, or in your area, kind of knowing that area of the country. Especially up in the Ozarks, is really steep. Kind of, the ridge tops are really kind of rounded off, but then they get pretty steep drops on the sides of them. If you're in that kind of habitat, if you can get across one of those drainages that nobody's really going to walk down, they can't take a four-wheeler to it or a truck to it, you're going to get away from a lot of people, especially on a permission property like that. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you just said. It's gonna hinge on what those other guys are doing, and kind of like what I just said about that public parcel here in Alabama that we might hunt in January. Whoever has the best access will win a lot of times, I feel like. So if you kind of figure out what the other guys are doing and can make a play off of that, I feel like you're going to put yourself in an advantage. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're doing what they're doing, you're going to get the same results as them. So you're going to want to be doing something different. But that would be my take on it, is definitely look at how they're hunting and make a play off of it. And really no different than public land or like hunting clubs or anything like that, because, I mean, it's pretty rare that you get a property all to yourself. So a lot of the stuff that we talk about week to week I think is going to apply really well. But I just try to hunt the hunters a little bit to try to learn the property and go from there. Here we go. Justin Morden says, "What happened to Michael Pike? The hummingbird story made me laugh harder than I ever have. We need some more funny / blooper stories." Man, I saw this one roll in the other day, and I completely forgot about that story. And oh my gosh, man, oh my gosh. So first of all, Michael Pike, he's currently like touring the country right now. He's out west. I think he's in Oregon as we're recording this. He's hanging out in Oregon doing photography stuff. So we actually talked to Michael the other day on the phone, and he said we told him when he comes back here he's got to come on the podcast, because we've had a lot of people asking about Mike, dude. And people were like, "Well, we need more rabbit holes. We need Michael Pike to come back." Because if you're new to the show and you weren't listening back when Michael was on pretty much every episode, Michael, he's pretty quiet. He'd stay over there in the corner for a lot of time, and then he'd come in with just something out of left field, and we would just go down the deepest rabbit hole ever. Like there was that one time we were talking. I can't even remember what we were talking about. Maybe
he was talking about the moon position, like how many miles away.
It was the distance. It was like, well, have you ever heard of that? And there's like a term for it. And we're like, no, we've never heard of that. He's like, well, it's how far the moon is from the Earth, and he like goes through this thing. And we're like, what are you talking about?
He's like giving us like specific, like, how many feet exactly is it away from us? But again, and Michael's a super serious hunter. Like, he was on the podcast a ton back in 2019, 2020, maybe a little bit 2021.
Yeah.
And then he kind of stepped back a little bit. But, we're definitely going to try to get him back on the show for you guys. Some of the long-time listeners will know of Michael. And if you're a newer listener, go back to listen to some of those older episodes, especially back in 2020. You're going to hear Michael on a bunch of those. So,
all right. We got time for one more. This is from Chris Yaples, which he spelled it like sounded out his name for me, so I appreciate that. That's a nice touch. I just moved to Alabama from he moved to the northern Birmingham area from Pennsylvania. I lived in North Dakota for 4 years while I was stationed there. I've hunted and been successful for mule deer and antelope and whitetail throughout the country, mainly for archery season. What should I expect for state land, and is it hard to get private permission without paying for a lease, as in going door knocking? Also, are you allowed to leave stands on a state WMA or use bait or sell cams in those areas? First of all, I'll say you definitely cannot use bait. You can use cell cameras, and you are allowed to leave stuff on most places. It depends. It's different for every place.
And the length of time you can have.
And the length that so you can't leave like a permanent stand. So you could go and put a hang on up, and that's perfectly legal. You just can't leave it out there forever.
And if you want, you can go to it's the Outdoor Alabama website, outdooralabama.com, has all the hunting regs, and you can look at individual pieces of public land that you're interested in hunting in, and it'll show the very specific regulations on each piece. Because I had somebody else ask me about cell cameras, and I'm like, you can check. I'm pretty certain on most public land in Alabama it's legal, but it's always good to go onto the website, again, outdooralabama.com, and look at the individual pieces of public land that you're wanting to go on, and it will have at the very top of the page, when it has like the map, it has all the hunt dates on there. It'll have all the specific regulations on what you cannot do on that property.
And it'll have the phone number of the biologist who runs that WMA, and it'd probably be easier just to give him a call.
Yeah, for sure. And you can talk to him.
They're super helpful. Super helpful. As far as what should he expect for state land, expect a lot of pine thickets, my man. A lot of pine thickets.
Yeah.
A lot of what we talk about on here is very geared towards exactly what you're going to be hunting. So that should be helpful. And as far as getting private permission without paying for a lease, that will be difficult.
So one thing I've learned in the Southeast, and you can do it, it's just you have to find the right landowner and be okay with being told no 150 times by the chance you get that maybe or okay. Just because of like hunting is such a big passion in the Southeast, it seems like any random piece of public, especially you start getting into more rural areas, has somebody on that private land. Every piece of private. Yeah, I apologize. Every piece of private, especially you start getting outside of city limits, outside the suburb areas, there's going to be someone potentially that either has permission, they've got family that hunt it, they have friends that hunt it, and it's going to be kind of hard. And a lot of people are very kind of territorial about who they let on their properties. So you can definitely do it. You can call people, go knock on doors. The best thing is going to be knock on doors if there's a house present on the property. If it's not, you're going to have to try to find a phone number. But I wouldn't put all your eggs in that basket.
I would very few eggs in that basket.
I mean, do it for sure. Try it. Maybe you'll have some really good success doing so. But I think you really need to look at areas. I would look at areas that aren't crazy, say remote or rural, just because those are the areas where you're going to probably have the highest numbers of hunters, whether it's through leased property, through family, friends. Somebody's going to be probably on that place. Versus if you get in an area that's a lot of different municipalities in Alabama don't allow urban bow hunting, and it doesn't state that necessarily. That rule specifically, but what they say is, and how they get around it is, you're not allowed to discharge archery equipment inside city limits. The hometown I'm from, they have that regulation. So like you couldn't urban bow hunt in my hometown of where I'm from, because they have that regulation with the city. So anything inside that city limits, you could technically, if you want to get real technical here, and I know we got a lot of police officers that listen to this, I don't think a police officer is ever going to get on to you unless a neighbor complains. Even if you live in one of those municipalities, if it says you can't discharge archery equipment, technically you can't even shoot your bow on your property.
You can't shoot your bow in your backyard.
You can't shoot your bow in your backyard,
which is
technically.
Stupid.
So, like where I'm originally from, technically you're not even supposed to like shoot your archery equipment in your backyard.
You broke that law, didn't you?
Many times. Many times.
Outlaw.
Well, but I mean, it's dumb. And I've talked to police officers that work for that municipality and some other cities as well. And if like you're shooting your backyard, unless someone complains about you, they're not going to say anything. Yeah. But it's one of those things that you got to be careful about some of that stuff.
Yeah. And what you said too about if you start getting outside of town, everything is going to be either a family property, which is very, very, very likely already hunted by somebody, or it's going to be a timber company and you're going to have to pay to get a lease. So
I'll tell you your best chance to get somebody. Hot tip. Use your OnX. And I know of property like this, and I've been trying to get this permission for a while now, but I can't get it. They won't do it. But one of your better places is if you're on OnX, looking around at parcel landowners and seeing when you click on them, it tells you their tax information of where their address is for the taxes for the property. If it's an out of state, if it's someone who lives out of state, that's the person I would call. Because if
you'll find their number.
Say it's 20 or 30 or 50 acres, someone might buy it as just like a little investment property. And especially, I'm talking outside of city limits and all that kind of stuff, unless you check with the regs and you can discharge archery equipment inside city limits, give those people a call. And some people I've talked to who's had success with this, kind of their pitch is, and I'll give you the pitch for them. Hasn't worked
giving
for me.
Away the juice.
Well, it hasn't worked for me quite yet on this one property I've been wanting to try to get permission on, but maybe it might happen in 10 years if it doesn't get developed. Is someone, if they don't have anybody currently looking at that property or watching that property, someone's potentially going to be doing some illegal stuff on that property. Yep. So coming in as a way that, hey, I'm going to keep an eye on your property because you don't live here, you live out of state, you live in a different part of the state or wherever. I can watch your property and make sure nothing's going on. I can make sure, fences are put together, gates are taken care of, all that kind of stuff. I can run cell cameras to make sure nobody's trespassing on the property in order to get permission to hunt your property. And I know guys who've had success doing that, both with like land, how do you say it? Like investment companies that have property, and then also with private landowners. So that would be kind of like the pitch I would kind of lean towards if you're trying to targeting those specific kind of people.
Tell them I'll run all the crackheads off your property if I can bow hunt it. All right, we got some reviews to read.
Which, by the way, new reviews here. Guys, if you've been enjoying the show, and again, if you're listening this far into the podcast or watching this far in the podcast, clearly you love the show, and we greatly appreciate your support by just watching and listening to the podcast. Another huge thing you can do is, especially if you listen on Apple Podcasts or if you listen on Spotify, is go leave us a review for the show. Spotify, you can leave us a 5-star review. If you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star written review, and we'll read off those new written reviews every week, especially as they come in. So we've had a few more come in this week, and we're just over 1,000 reviews on Apple Podcasts, so I greatly appreciate that. Also, another big thing you can do that will tremendously help the podcast is share the podcast with some buddies. This is the time of the year, I promise you, everybody here is probably listening to this podcast has somebody that will message them, man, y'all take me hunting this year. Or, man, I want to go hunting this year, blah, blah, blah. Send them the podcast and get them excited about going hunting and actually learning something first before you accept them to actually go hunting with you. That's what I would say. It's like, if you want to go hunt with me, you can listen to Southern Outdoorsman podcast, listen to your whatever your favorite episode is, send it to them so they have some context of what they're going to be getting into as they go and hunt with you. But
that's a hot tip right there.
Hot tip.
Get them invested before you bring them out.
Because listen, this is how I do it. I would not take anybody hunting with me unless they listen to an episode, and then I would almost quiz them on it. Be like, so tell me what's your thoughts on the guest. And if they BS you, like, dude, you're not serious enough to even listen to this episode.
Yeah.
Kind of on the topics of what we're going to be focused on as we go hunting. And if you're not going to do that, I'm not going to spend the time taking you hunting if you're not going to take this seriously.
That's great. That's a hot tip. All right, this is from Slipping in the Sip. High quality content.
God, I
5 stars.
I love that name.
Golly, we got to come up with like T-shirts for all these names. Congrats on 500. TSO is a great product and one I enjoy listening to regularly. I have learned a ton, and I'm better equipped at connecting the dots in the deer and turkey woods. I greatly appreciate all your hard work, and I've witnessed growth in you guys the past couple years. Keep pumping out great content, and I'll keep supporting and listening. By the way, when can we get a Stay Southern T-shirt? The T-shirt thing, man, we want to get some T-shirts. We're working on it. Merch is hard, dude. It's hard, but our hats are on the way.
Oh, we got them ordered?
Yes.
Oh,
our
boys.
hats are on the way,
guys.
I got it taken care of. Let's go,
dude. When you slept, it cut my headphones out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's too loud.
Okay, here you go. This is yours.
Oh, okay.
All right, this is good. I like this.
All right, so this is from K. Brook Jr. and title is Urban Monkey Hunt. Oh, this is great. Yeah, I read this one. 5 stars. Can you guys find out from Pablo if the Urban Monkey Hunt in Costa Rica is a draw permit or if it's over the counter? Costa Rica is technically still southern.
Hey, I'll give you that.
Love all the episodes, guys. Good luck this season. That's in
episode 500.
Episode 500, the very first interview on episode 500, where we interviewed a bunch of listeners. Pablo was talking about that and how he kind of grew up in Costa Rica and shooting howler monkeys,
smoking
and stuff.
monkeys with a slingshot.
Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get him on for a full episode. This is from your local cable guy. 5 stars.
Last review we're gonna read.
Can't stop listening. Longtime listener from Mississippi. This podcast is what pulls me through the work week every week. It's the perfect fuel for my unhealthy obsession with chasing these whitetails. Every episode is loaded with useful information. There's always something to learn. Keep up the good work, guys. Also, bring back the killadilla so we can get lost in the rabbit hole again. The killadilla, that's
Michael Pike.
Yep, the armadillo, which he got the nickname because Michael Perry gave him the nickname the armadillo because he's turned over every leaf in Alabama looking for big bucks. So yeah, we're getting the killadilla back on. He'll be back. Whenever he comes back from out west.
Yeah, absolutely. But guys, appreciate y'all listening to this episode. Appreciate y'all watching this episode. And hey, just to let y'all know, guys, Andrew's been working on a couple hunt films. It's gonna be coming out a little bit later on, potentially. I don't know, sometime.
Yeah, here's what you're gonna do. Typical salesman thing. He's gonna throw out a date.
It's gonna be out tomorrow. Okay. No, it'll be out hopefully soon. Andrew's been working on them for a little while. I think you guys are going to absolutely enjoy it and kind of give you an eye of what we're going to be trying to shoot for this fall when it comes to more video hunts.
Yeah.
Doing a very specific style that not only incorporates the entertainment that everybody likes when it comes to watching hunting films, but also bringing some of the aspects of the podcast into it, of things that you can take away from those videos and actually directly apply, and hopefully you go have success as well. So, anyways, you check that out on the Southern Outdoorsman YouTube channel. Make sure you guys are following along with us on Instagram and Facebook at the Southern Outdoorsman, and we'll catch you back for another episode from the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast.